Imagine a world where death is not a mere ending but a decree, delivered by a relentless force that no prayer or plea could overturn. In the vast and mysterious mythology of ancient Mesopotamia, one name struck terror into the hearts of mortals and gods alike: Namtar. Neither fully god nor mortal, he was the herald of death, the unyielding executor of fate, and the chilling messenger of the underworld. To hear his name whispered in the dark was to feel the cold grip of doom tightening around one's soul. He was the bringer of plagues, the shadow that moved unseen, ensuring that no one, neither king nor peasant, escaped their destined end. While his name may be less well known today, in the ancient world, he was the embodiment of terror itself, a constant reminder that death was not just inevitable, but often merciless. Namtar, also written as Namtaru, was a major figure in Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian belief systems. His name means fate or doom, and he served as the loyal minister and chief messenger of Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld. Unlike many of the underworld's chaotic and monstrous spirits, Namtar had a specific and chilling purpose. He delivered death and suffering to both gods and mortals alike. He was said to command 60 demons that spread disease, misfortune, and untimely death. Namtar was not just an executioner. He was an embodiment of the inescapable will of the gods. He could strike down kings, warriors, and even divine beings with a mere decree from Ereshkigal. In some accounts, Namtar was born from the underworld itself, crafted by Ereshkigal to serve as her unwavering hand of judgment. Other myths suggest he was a primordial entity, existing since the dawn of time, as the force that ensured that nothing living could escape its fate. Unlike the gods of war or chaos, who could be appeased with offerings and sacrifices, Namtar's arrival signified an end. There was no bargaining, no second chance, only submission to the fate he carried. Some scholars believe that Namtar's origins reflect the ancient Mesopotamians' deep anxiety about death. Unlike other deities, he did not represent an afterlife or a cycle of rebirth. He was pure, inescapable finality. The Mesopotamians viewed fate as unchangeable, and Namtar was its enforcer. Whether through sickness, disaster, or war, his role was to ensure that death arrived exactly as the gods decreed. His power was such that he could command legions of diseased spirits, each one capable of wiping out entire cities. Some texts describe him as moving through the land unseen, his breath alone enough to bring plague. Others depict him in the service of higher gods, carrying their curses to those who had angered them. When the gods wished to punish, it was Namtar they sent as their executioner. Ancient texts describe Namtar as a grotesque figure, a skeletal, rotting visage with claws and the stench of decay. He was often portrayed as having a terrifying, elongated face, hollow eyes, and a gaping mouth that spoke only of death. Some depictions suggested he was not fully human or divine, but rather a nightmarish amalgamation of both, reinforcing his role as a bridge between life and the underworld. His flesh was said to be mottled and discolored, as if he carried the corruption of the underworld upon his very form. His fingers were long and talon-like, curling like withered branches, capable of spreading disease with the slightest touch. Some accounts describe him dripping with blackened ichor, leaving a trail of decay wherever he walked. His breath was believed to carry the scent of open graves, and his voice, when he chose to speak, was said to resemble the wails of the dying. Mesopotamian art rarely depicted him directly, perhaps out of fear, but surviving descriptions paint him as a shadowy, spectral figure, looming like an omen of death. At times, he was imagined as having multiple faces, each representing a different plague or fate, or a distorted form, neither fully skeletal nor fully fleshed, as if he was trapped between existence and dissolution. One of the most famous stories featuring Namtar is the descent of Ishtar into the underworld. The tale begins with Ishtar, a powerful goddess of love, war, and fertility, who sought to extend her influence beyond the realm of the living. Determined to challenge her sister Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld, Ishtar descended into the dark abyss, demanding entry at the gates of the dead. The underworld was a place of no return, governed by strict laws that even gods could not defy. As Ishtar approached, she was met by the gatekeeper, who relayed her request to Ereshkigal. In response, the queen ordered that Ishtar be allowed to enter, but under one condition: she must pass through 7 gates, surrendering a piece of her divine power at each one. At the first gate, she relinquished her crown, a symbol of her sovereignty. At the second, she gave up her earrings, which represented her wisdom. With each gate she passed, more of her divine adornments were stripped away: her necklace, bracelets, breastplate, and robe, until at the 7th and final gate, she stood completely naked and powerless before Ereshkigal's throne. It was here that Namtar, acting as the queen's executioner, struck Ishtar down with the gaze of death. The mighty goddess, once feared and revered, fell lifeless to the ground, and her spirit was imprisoned in the underworld. With Ishtar trapped, the world above fell into chaos and despair. Crops withered, love ceased to exist, and the forces of life came to a grinding halt. The gods, realizing that without Ishtar the world would decay into oblivion, were forced to intervene. They pleaded with Ereshkigal to release her, but the Queen of the Dead refused. Death was not something easily undone. In the end, the gods devised a compromise. Ishtar could return to the land of the living, but only if a substitute took her place in the underworld. Namtar, ever the obedient servant, was tasked with ensuring this exchange was fulfilled. He searched for a soul to replace Ishtar, eventually setting his sights on Tammuz, Ishtar's lover, who had failed to mourn her absence. He was seized and dragged into the underworld, ensuring that balance was restored. Namtar was also closely associated with disease and pestilence, acting as a divine enforcer when the gods wished to punish humanity. Unlike chaotic demons or malevolent spirits that spread illness for pleasure or destruction, Namtar's work was methodical, deliberate, and unstoppable. He was not a sadistic force, nor did he act on whims. His role was purely to deliver fate, and when fate decreed suffering, it was Namtar who ensured it was carried out. Ancient Mesopotamians believed that sickness was more than just a physical affliction. It was a spiritual curse sent from the underworld. Diseases were often seen as punishments for breaking divine laws, offending the gods, or failing to perform proper rituals. Unlike natural ailments, which could be healed through medicine or rest, illnesses inflicted by Namtar required spiritual intervention. Elaborate purification rites, prayers, and sacrifices were the only hope for those stricken by his plagues. In some texts, Namtar is depicted as an unseen force, walking through cities like a shadow, bringing sickness to anyone he touched. His breath was said to be poison, his gaze enough to wither crops and livestock. Entire towns could fall victim to his touch, their people perishing in days without explanation. No walls could keep him out, no charms or amulets could ward him off. Once his name was whispered, doom was inevitable. During times of plague, priests and healers would perform exorcisms and sacrificial rites, offering gifts to appease Ereshkigal in hopes of halting Namtar's deadly march. Some cities even had designated plague rituals, where scapegoats, such as animals or even condemned criminals, were symbolically burdened with the disease and cast out into the wilderness, an attempt to send the plague away with them. There were also prayers to other gods, particularly those of healing like Gula, the goddess of medicine, or Ninazu, the god of healing and the underworld, asking them to intervene and counteract Namtar's wrath. However, once his decree had been given, it was almost impossible to overturn. Even the gods themselves were hesitant to interfere, for Namtar was not acting on his own will, but carrying out the unbreakable orders of fate. Another chilling tale involving Namtar is his encounter with the war god Nergal. In this myth, Namtar once visited the great heavens as a guest at a feast of the gods. However, when he arrived, the other deities recoiled in horror, for he bore the stench of death and decay. His skeletal form, hollow eyes, and grotesque visage were reminders of the inevitability of mortality, something the gods of the heavens wished to forget. Among them, Nergal, the god of war, strength, and pestilence, refused to show him respect. While other deities turned away in disgust, Nergal openly mocked Namtar, calling him a rotting husk unworthy of divine presence. Enraged but bound by his duty, Namtar silently bore the insult and returned to the underworld, where he reported the slight to Ereshkigal. Furious, the Queen of the Dead demanded retribution and commanded that Nergal be dragged into her realm. What followed was a battle between Nergal and the forces of the underworld. Nergal, unwilling to be humbled, stormed into Ereshkigal's palace, slaying her demons and breaking through every barrier. At last, he stood before the Queen of the Dead, and in a shocking twist, rather than defeat her, he took her as his consort, becoming the ruler of the underworld alongside her. Despite Nergal's victory, Namtar was not defeated. He remained the ever-loyal, ever-dreaded Hand of Death, continuing his role as the executioner of fate, ensuring that no soul, god or mortal, could escape the final judgment of the underworld. The fear of Namtar did not vanish with the fall of Mesopotamian civilizations. Later cultures inherited the idea of a death-bringing messenger, appearing in forms like the Grim Reaper, the Angel of Death, and disease-bringing demons. These figures, much like Namtar, were seen as relentless enforcers of fate, bringing death as an unavoidable decree. His legacy is also evident in the belief that plagues and pandemics were divine punishment, an idea that persisted throughout history in various religious and mythological traditions. Medieval societies often interpreted outbreaks of disease as the work of supernatural forces, much like how the Mesopotamians feared Namtar's unseen hand spreading pestilence. Even in modern times, the concept of an inescapable force delivering death and suffering continues to appear in literature, folklore, and religious thought. Though Namtar's name has faded, his chilling essence remains deeply woven into the human understanding of mortality. Namtar was more than just a demon or a god. He was the very concept of death itself, the inescapable fate that loomed over every mortal being. He did not delight in his work, nor did he seek personal power. Instead, he was the unrelenting executor of divine will, a force that even the gods could not ignore. To the ancient Mesopotamians, death was not just an end, but a journey into the unknown, and Namtar was its cruel, indifferent guide. His name may have faded from common memory, but his shadow lingers in every myth of death that followed. Even today, echoes of Namtar can be found in folklore and religious traditions around the world. The Grim Reaper, the Angel of Death, and even the idea of plague-bearing spirits all stem from the same ancient fear, that death is an entity with a purpose, a messenger that cannot be bargained with. Whether in literature, film, or cultural superstitions, the essence of Namtar endures, a testament to humanity's eternal struggle with the inevitability of death.
Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.